All right, boys and girls, welcome back to the drive-through. I don't even know what to do. We didn't have Positive Wednesday, and now my whole life is thrown off. But, you know, as always, sponsored by the deli. Stop by the deli, get yourself some chocolate-covered raisins. Okay, this is a completing the square unit. I just gave you a little lecture about why we're doing this. This is going to seem like a lot of unnecessary work, so just to do a really quick recap of that lecture, you can figure out how to do these in your calculator. You won't get the answer exactly right, but you will get it very, very close to being right, which does matter to a lot of people in the world. Okay? Part of what we're doing here is going to apply later when we get into what's called conic sections, and so you just have to trust me. If you want to go to a good business school and eventually take a little calculus, you've got to be able to do this. Otherwise, just use your graphing calculator and try to get the answers right, okay? All right, the first three are pretty easy. What they've done for you is they're doing the math for you, but they haven't answered the question. The question says to solve each equation, okay? So it says x squared equals 9 or x squared minus 9 equals 0. What's the opposite of squaring a number? Square root, okay? So if you take the square root of both sides, you get x equals what? You get x equals 3. But hold on. Doesn't this thing look like a parabola here? Okay? And what would the minus 9 do to that parabola? Excellent, excellent, Island. It would make it go down 9. So how many answers should there be to this? What's the other answer? Very good. So hopefully that's starting to make more sense. In Algebra 1, you kind of just learned how to solve these. This is why there is Algebra 2, because now your brains have matured, and now maybe that makes a little more sense, okay? Explain that. So, a great question was just asked. What's the difference between the top equation and the second equation? Whoever made this worksheet is listing, this is the original equation, but then since there's no b term, there's no like 5x or negative 2x, then the strategy is just to get the numbers on one side and the letter on the other. Does that make sense? Okay? So, square root both sides, what's your answer? X equals plus or minus 4. That's another way you could write it. But if you don't like that, just write it as 4 or negative 4. Yeah, Siobhan? All right, and so here you get x equals 1 or negative 1. Now, doesn't number 4 look a little bit different? Is that true? So what's number 4 say? I'll just put it up in pen. 2x squared minus 64 equals 0. Okay, so since there's no term that is like 5x or 2x, which is a bx term, we get all the numbers on one side. So we're going to add 64 to both sides. You get 2x squared equals 64. Now, what do you think my next step is? Nah. Divide by 2. And you get x squared equals 32. Now, if you want to get this question completely right on your test, you would have to write x equals, it's called radical 32 or negative radical 32, because that's not a perfect answer. Okay, if you give me the decimal estimate, you will get most of the credit. And that's how I'll have to differentiate between the kids that are using their graphing calculators and the kids that are completing the square. We haven't completed the square yet, so don't even worry. If you don't understand what that means, that makes sense. Jack? I do. On the test, I want you to write the answer exactly. Exactly, okay? All right. So, now, what this little section of the worksheet is doing is teaching you how to complete the square, okay? Here's what you do. You take the b term, cut it in half, That's where they got the 4, okay? And then you square it, and you get this thing right here. It's called 16. Now you write that 16 in here. Rewrite that trinomial as x squared plus 8x plus 16. When you do this thing called completing the squares, your answers are always a perfect square in here. So you're looking for two numbers that multiply to be 16 and add to be 8. What are those two numbers? Exactly. So it's x plus 4 times x plus 4, which we would rather have you write as x plus 4 squared. And that is why it's called completing the square. I can't explain to you why you want to be able to do this yet, but when we get to the back, it might help a little bit. Okay? All right, so once again, you identify what b is. It's 20. You cut it in half. That's 10. And then you square that number to complete the square. So what's 10 squared? Okay, now I'll rewrite this. X squared plus 20x plus 100. If you did it right, this will be a perfectly easy thing to factor. Two numbers that multiply to be 100 and add to be 20. It's always b over 2. 10, right? 10 times 10 is 100. 10 plus 10 is 20. So this is going to be x plus 10 times x plus 10, which is x plus 10 squared. I know. Yeah. You can skip the x plus 10 times x plus 10. No, I don't want you to. You have to write it like this. You can skip this step if you want, but I'm never going to skip it because I really want you to understand what you're doing. I don't want you to just go through the process. Jacob, you sure? Yeah. Okay. Half of 14? 7 squared? Okay. You're right. Excellent, Alex. It's not going to matter, but it definitely, I'm glad you pointed that out. Half of negative 14, negative 7, and negative 7 squared, it's still positive 49, but it is going to affect our final answer, Alex. Okay? So now we got x squared minus 14x plus 49. We're looking for two numbers that multiply to be positive 49, but add to be negative 14. So what are those? Excellent. X minus 7 times x minus 7, which is x minus 7 squared, and that is called completing the square. Okay? So we've solved by not completing the square, and then we've learned how to complete the square. So now we are going to solve by completing the square. Now, I want you to look at this. Remember that little summative assessment we did on Monday where it didn't count for a grade? It was just helping us get ready for the SAT? Okay? If this was on there, I hope you would have had a really good idea on how to get to the answer. Okay, excellent. What multiplies to be 9 but adds to be 12? Unfortunately, we don't know that. So then what would you have done next? Popped it in your calculator, is that what you said? Oh, do a real to split the middle? That won't work for this one because there's not a number here, but I like it, Adrian. That's a good strategy. I hoped you just would have popped that thing in your calculator and figured out, remember the little water bug trick? Well, I want you to know that still works. That's not done working. That's why it's really important that you guys read the directions and understand what you're doing, because your calculator will be able to bail you out of a lot of these things. And if you're on a test, for me, and you're like, I don't know how to do this, but I know I could get the answer in my calculator. Well, get it. At least write down the right answer. I'm going to give you a lot of credit for the right answer. Because guess what? On the SAT, you don't show any work. There's no work shown. You just got to be able to do what? You got to be able to do something. Okay? It's not about knowing things. It's about being able to do things. Okay? All right. So look, here's the strategy here. they're kind of showing you how to do it. So the first thing you do is you get the letters on one side, and then you get the number on the other, okay? Then you do what we just did. What's half of 12? And what's 6 squared? But now we've got an equal sign here. So I can't just add a 36 to this side. I also have to add a 36 to this side. If you remember, when we go back here, there were no equal signs. This was just practicing. Now, we are solving. That's the difference. So when there's an equal sign, we can't just go add a 36 to this side. I've got to add a 36 to that side. Does that make sense? Okay, so we're not done yet. Now this is where I'll pick up. So now I'm looking for two numbers that multiply to be 36 and add to be 12. So what are those numbers? 6 and 6. So x plus 6 times x plus 6 equals, let's see, negative 9 plus 36 is a positive 27. All right, now stay with me here. How are we going to rewrite this? X plus 6 squared, and I'm just going to rewrite that as 27. Okay? Next step. I totally understand if you think that we should add or subtract 6 or subtract 36, but this is where it gets a little weird. We're actually going to square root both sides. Okay? Now, what does the square root do to the squared? It cancels it. So on this side, now we just have a nice, easy x plus 6. We want our answer exact. 27 is not a perfect square, so we leave it as radical 27. So now we just have one more step. Our answer is going to be funky. Hazy, what do we do now? Subtract 6. And our answer, believe it or not, we want you to write it as radical 27 minus 6. That's your answer. Excuse me, no it's not. This should be a plus or minus, this should be a plus or minus, and this should be a plus or minus. I just made the critical mistake. Because when you take the square root of something, it could be positive or negative. Remember that from 2 slides ago? So the answer, you could write it as this. That's a fine way to write it. Or you could write it as radical 27 minus 6 or negative radical 27 minus 6. Yes. So, I know we skipped this one, but the answer for this one is just one step away. Let's go on to this one. Notice, it's already in a form that we like. So, we want to take negative 10, we want to cut it in half. What's half of negative 10? It's negative 5, and negative 5 squared equals? So we're going to add 25 to both sides because this is an equation and we got to treat each side the same. Okay? So far so good? Now, this thing over here is x. Somebody factor that for me. X minus 5 times x minus 5, thank you. On the right side, you get a 14. So then x minus 5 squared is 14. Next step, square root both sides. You get x minus 5 is plus or minus 14. That's where I screwed up last time. Add 5 to both sides. So x is radical 14 plus 5 or negative radical 14 plus 5. Or you could just write it like that. I know, it's weird. We're going to practice it, and now at least I can go to the back and I can show you why in the heck are we learning how to do this. Okay, so maybe this looks familiar. You hated this problem on the quiz in the test. I don't even know if you remember it, but what you had to do was pop this thing into your graphing calculator, search for the vertex, search for another point, Then you had to write out y equals a times x minus h squared plus k, fill everything in, solve it for a, and then pop the a back in and get your equation. Literally, I think maybe 4 of you guys got it right on the test. But maybe it's more like 6. Okay? That way still works. But I think this way is easier. Here's what you do. You're going to complete the square on the right side. Okay? So, you're going to get y equals, hold on, let me give myself some space. Sorry. Y equals x squared plus 10x. Okay? How do I want to show you guys how to do this? Let's add 9 to both sides right away. That's probably the best way to do it. Okay, so I screwed the beginning of this up. Sorry, I've never taught this before. Do you see what I did there? All I did was add 9 to both sides to start. Essentially, I got my x's by themselves. Does that make sense? So far, so good? All right, now, I want to complete the square on this side. So what's half of 10? And what's 5 squared? So I'm going to add 25 to both sides. Normally you'd be like, why are you doing that? I hear you. You just got to trust me on this. So you got y plus 34 equals, and now we have x squared plus 10x plus 25. Any idea what we would do next? Factor the right side. Excellent. You guys are doing great. Y plus 34 equals x plus 5 times x plus 5. So y plus 34 is x plus 5 squared. We're almost done. No, I'm not going to square root because we're not solving it, but that makes sense. That's what we've done up until this point. Okay? Exactly. Very good. We want to write it in vertex form. Maybe you guys don't even remember what that is, but it's y equals a times x minus h squared plus k. Do you remember that? So now when we subtract 34 from both sides, you get y equals x plus 5 squared minus 34. And now we've got the answer done. Faster. Okay, so this one I'm going to do at regular speed. So I'm going to rewrite it. Y equals x squared minus 18x plus 13. Subtract 13 from both sides. Okay, what's half of 18? 9 squared is. So I'm going to add 81 to both sides. So you get y. What's 81 minus 13? Y plus 68 is x squared minus 18x plus 81. Oops. Now, good news, bad news. Ready? Good news is they decided we were treating you guys like you weren't smart enough and that we needed to challenge you guys more so that you were more prepared to succeed. That is good news for you, and it's true. The bad news is you got to do stuff like this now. You down? Good. Good answer, Jacob. Boom!